very nice, very nice. But we're going to learn about some very interesting concepts. And today, I think I found the perfect analog to do this. So before, we were kind of using it in terms of like chess, where we talked about positioning and we talked about, you know, taking and development. And I think that those are helpful. But I think going to movement, I discovered recently with Saber that I think the best route in order to explain how neutral works is actually to go down the route of traditional martial arts. So if you guys have any martial arts background, it's time to dust off your black belt. It's time to unsheath your swords. We're going to be going through some very interesting topics today, and I have three major concepts that I'm going to lay down. It's going to be a shorter class, but in that time, I'm going to go ahead and lay down these three concepts. We're going to talk about them in depth. I'm going to show you sources for these concepts. I have 3 months of Taekwondo. Perfect. I'm going to have sources for these concepts, and I'm going to talk about how they apply in Dragon Ball. And if you guys want extra, if you guys are having a little bit of a hard time, or you guys want a little bit of a more in-depth, or you guys have more specific questions that you don't think I'll get to on stream, I'm also going to start a new thing where after masterclasses every Monday, I'm going to start holding a voice chat every single Monday after we do a masterclass. I'm going to host a voice chat, so if you guys are a sub, you can pop into that voice chat and we can basically go through a more in-depth discussion where I don't have restrictions. I can show you the matches that I want to show you, and we have some more examples just to make sure that you guys get the help that you need. That said, I'm not skimping out on the masterclasses. You guys are still getting all of the information for free, so please don't worry about that if you're not subbed. But yeah, links distributed. Yeah, make sure to give them the God of Destructions and training role when they come in. If you guys don't have the God of Destruction and training role, you're basically not going to see anything. If we don't get to it, just hang tight. Somebody will get you. I will make sure at the very least. Legit, I'm a black belt, and last time I took any classes was at least 5 years ago. Damn. I know a lot of you guys like to do martial arts, and I feel like that's why a lot of people I just turned Irish for a second. Martial arts. Martial arts. Anyway, a little bit of an accent slip there, but yeah, I think we're gonna have a very, very, very fun time. But we're going to talk about this. Before we begin, I'm going to lay down some specific concepts. And also, actually, you know what? Before I begin, because I see a lot of new faces here, do you guys have a question that you would like to ask? Do you guys have anything that you would like me to address before we get started? Anything you're hoping I'll clarify in the stream? Just let me know while we get ready. I'm going to go ahead and get some more interesting music going on here. Let's see. We're going to do this. Never been to one of these, so this will be interesting for me. I hope I impress you. That will be a very big help. I want to get back into it, but dojos are expensive. Yes. In the meantime, tell me, some of you guys, tell me what martial arts you used to practice. I'm very curious. I wonder what Saber used to practice. I could not fathom for the life of me what he could possibly do. You know, it's crazy. Muay Thai and BJJ. Damn, my man just trying to kill people. All right, cool. All right, let's see. I'm gonna use a very interesting team. Very interesting collection of teams for this one. I'm gonna use the difference between this team, because this will be great to illustrate my point. I did Taekwondo as a kid, but eventually stopped. I don't remember why I stopped, but it was enjoyable. American Taekwondo, wonderful teacher, was my MMA was an MMA fighter before, but also helped with life lessons and discipline. Very nice. You learned Kempo. That's interesting, Fuzzy. I like Kempo. Then a lot of these terms may be familiar because a lot of them actually do extend to a lot of the terms that I'm going to use are going to be interesting, and I'll tell you guys where they're from as well. So but this should be very, very helpful to a lot of you guys. So the way this is going to go down is I'm going to go down each of the concepts. We're going to talk about them a little bit, and then after I go over the concepts, I'm going to explain a little bit about where their history is from, how they were used in traditional martial arts, and how they actually, I did it again, martial arts, martial arts, yeah. I don't know what it is, but that it activates like an Irish accent in me. Martial arts. Like, I don't know why. You know what? It's because I was listening to a podcast between Roger Deakins and Dom Hall Gleason, and I feel like that just completely fucked my accent. Ken, I wish you didn't say it like that. Thank you. All right, and of course, so these two teams are going to be really interesting to talk about. I think Star plays color 4. Oh, color 7 with this team is actually kind of stuck. All right, guys. You know, it's an age-old tradition. Where are we going? Can I be modded so I can mute Saber? Did I not mute you already? Hang on, I thought I muted you. Maybe I have to do the bracket. That's why. Invalid username. Okay, well, I tried. Wasteland tournament. Fuzzy, of all the people, I thought you should be... Wait, are none of you guys modded? I have to mod you guys. I have limits, man. How dare you mute me for a pun? Lol. Guys, focus. Where are we going? Wasteland tournament. We need more. We need duplicates. Where are we going? Wasteland. Okay, Wasteland was the first one to get a duplicate, so we'll do Wasteland. People who always vote for World Tournament confuse me, man. They're like the kinds of people that are like, we're in an ice cream parlor. You can get whatever ice cream flavor you want. And they're like, vanilla. All right. Anyway. Whew. Anyway, so very, very simple. Before we begin, I'm going to take a minute. Do you guys have any questions or any concepts that you would like to go over? Any concepts that you guys might feel a bit hazy on, or that you would like a little bit more of a clarification, or you're hoping I go over in this class before we get started? This is actually a really good exercise. Holy shit. This actually requires like fine motor control. Yeah, I can't even get the float. Do you guys have anything you'd like to go over right before we begin? I wouldn't have the greatest grasp on neutral, so I wouldn't have any real questions either. That's okay. This is like not the first time that I've gone over this topic, so I want to make sure that my that you guys are following along. I expect my subs who have been here for a while to answer more, because I want to make sure that everything that I've taught before is at least pretty clear. Do you use float macro or manual input? Manual input. I didn't even know there was a float macro, unless you meant the super jump macro. In which case, I use both. It depends on the situation, but most of the time, manual. Which is what's going on right here. Is there a downside to the macro float? Other than the fact that it's a little bit less convenient to set up? Not really. Because the way you can set it up, you see how I have like an S input right there? I buffered that in the animation of JM, so now I can just, you know, see? So there's no real downside to it, other than the fact that it could make certain inputs, like, depending on how you're holding your controller, it could make certain confirms a little bit more difficult, like when you're about to attack, but it's not a big deal. Yes, you have to hold, well, I'm not holding A, I'm holding S, but yes. It's better if you use, yeah. I am holding S, yeah. I am holding S, that's why you can see it grayed out. But I do let it go when I win. All right, let's see. Let's see what we can do, okay? Yeah, I think I'm still struggling. Not bad. Last time I played him was damn near 20 matches, only was like 3. Okay. Being aware of my opponent's square and what I can do to take advantage of those squares. I think this is going to be a little bit more of a cleaner analogy for you guys, so this is going to be pretty interesting. The first concept that I'm going to introduce is actually one that I took from fencing. The Saber is probably very happy right now. So, biggest thing... Actually, you know what? I'm trying to figure out which concept I should start with, because all three of them kind of link into each other very, very particularly. And I could start with one of them, but it would take me the longest to explain it. And it would be the most difficult to explain, and it would be the one that we would focus on the most. But I guess the first thing that we're going to talk about is a very foundational principle. I want you guys to treat these things as principles of neutral. Meaning, I'm not really going to teach you so much how to move or like what you need to do, but these are going to be foundational principles to forming our own strategies and understanding neutral as a whole when we see them. If you're advanced enough, you can probably begin to apply these concepts immediately. However, don't be frustrated if you can't immediately. I'm just trying to basically decode neutral as a language so that way you guys can properly understand exactly what we're doing. So, best way to do that, and that's why I selected these teams. So the first concept we're going to talk about is balance. You might be wondering, what the hell does balance mean? We've talked about it a little bit before, but it's also a concept that I noticed a lot of my students had trouble with. So I think we're just going to unify it. You guys may know this as tempo. Tempo is a part of balance, but it's going to be a little bit different here. I think balance is a little bit more clear and a little bit more precise, and tempo is an element of balance that you guys are going to use to identify whether or not you have an advantage. We've also used positional advantage, which overall I think is a bit clunky. We're going to consolidate both terms into a single one: balance. What do I mean by balance? What does that actually mean? Well, right here we have, I kind of actually dig the no overlay look. I think that's actually kind of neat. Anyway, I think about this one a little bit more different, more literal for me. Yeah, it looks good. Well, notice how right here both Gojitas are perfectly at 0. It says our frame advantage is 0. If I dash, my Gogeta is now -4. Now, there's nothing that the blue Gogeta can really take advantage of here. He can punch, yeah, but if I backdash, I'm -15. Now, this is something that the blue Gogeta can actually meaningfully take. This is very important here. And the reason why this is important to keep in mind is because in a perfectly balanced position, it really is going to come down to, assuming all things are equal, like they are in this position, it's going to come down to who can press a button first, me or the blue Gogeta. Now, the timing is completely equal. If the balance is off, if I dash and then press 5M, blue Gogeta's 5M, even if pressed at the same time I dash, blue Gogeta's gonna win because the balance is broken. Balance is an important concept to keep in mind. And maintaining the balance and breaking the balance is very, 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 very important. So how do you break the balance? We're going to go over that as we get a little bit deeper into neutral, but basically you don't want to be in a position where you're at a disadvantage. Notice how retreating puts you at a pretty big disadvantage. Notice how whiffing a normal puts you at a pretty big disadvantage. Now, whether or not they can do anything depends on another concept that we will get into a bit later. It will be the last principle we talk about and the most important one, but balance is foundational. So, you're probably sick and tired of Gogeta being on the screen. You guys are probably tired of fusions and you guys are tired of this or that. And you guys probably have this idea in your head of like skip neutral buttons. Oh, just do Lariat. You know, why wouldn't a Gogeta just do this, right? Why wouldn't a Gogeta just do this? Or why wouldn't the Gogeta just do this? Other than the reasons that you just saw me whiff entirely. Most importantly, the biggest thing to keep in mind here in this particular position, okay, is that balance is incredibly important. Because every single action that I take breaks the balance. If I'm successful, you know, I can break the balance, which is cool. You know, I can break the balance and you know, start, you know, maneuvering and winning. Like, you want to break the balance in that way. But here's the problem. What happens if I whiff? Now the balance is still broken, but my opponent has maintained their balance. They are perfectly centered. My opponent can do anything. We call this a flexible position, but I think in martial arts terms, it's easier to think of it as you don't want to overcommit to anything. This is why if you ever watched a fight or a sparring match or a pay-per-view match of like boxers or like MMA fighters, you'll notice that very rarely, hey Mrs. Beers, how's it going? You'll notice that very rarely do they actually throw a punch. You'll notice that they'll step in, step out, they'll throw like a feint, but you'll notice that they're kind of bobbing and weaving and feeling each other out. The reason why is because both of them know how essential it is to maintain the balance, and nobody wants to break it in a way that creates disadvantage for them. Whenever an opponent is disadvantaged, we call this, or whenever an opponent is disadvantaged and another one, like if your opponent is disadvantaged and you have the advantage, we like to call this tempo. This means that if you guys press a button at the same exact time, you will likely win because your opponent has to recover from something first in order to actually capitalize on it. Meanwhile, you're not encumbered. For example, I can dash kick here, but if I backdash kick here, this has a lot more recovery. So I can do this and probably stuff my opponent. I can do this, but I will probably get counter hit by the time I do. Just because this takes me so long to recover from. Are you guys following me so far? Is this making a little bit of sense? I want to make sure that we're all on the same page. Very nice. Very nice. If we're all on the same page, we're going to move on. So what does this exactly mean for us? How can we begin to apply this practically? Well, if you actually watch Wawa, or if you watch Yasha, or you've seen me talk about these two, you'll notice that they don't really poke all that much. You'll normally see Wawa moving like this. Or you'll see Wawa just starting buffering, you know? And then he sees something and then he'll jump forward, call an assist. Or he will wait for the landing and then come in for the attack. The reason why is because every time you whiff something, even your skip neutral options like 236H for Gogeta, you are creating an imbalance. This is the weakness of the idea of skip neutral. Now, what people think of skip neutral as, okay, I'm going to throw out a beam, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do a lariat, or I'm going to do some kind of option that's really dumb and really big and really fast. I'm going to press Vegito 5M. Even those tools, as strong as they are, and they are strong, and please don't misunderstand me, I'm not saying that they're not strong for what they are, but they are still beholden to the weaknesses of balance. Just like you can still beat an opponent with a much longer reach than you by manipulating this balance and attacking more carefully. Being encumbered is being behind in a vulnerable position. Is that correct? Yeah, you can interpret it that way. But this is what we do to preserve the balance. You might notice that a lot of players move like this. Oop, not like that, but Gogeta's. Gogeta. I'm a bit rusty. I need to practice my movement because my super jump IEDs are not clean anymore. I'm very rusty. Point is, you'll see them move like this a lot. This still creates an imbalance because your opponent has to land. You know, I still have to land. If you have a Ki Blast, you can actually stuff my landing here, and you can also stuff my assist calls. So, very, very important. So you want to maintain the balance, and every movement pattern that we think about is one that maintains the balance. For example, you guys have seen me talk about short hop. Short hop is more flexible, but more importantly, because you get to the ground faster and in a good position, this is the perfect, if you have to move forward, this is probably the perfect way to do so while maintaining balance. It's also the most flexible because I can backdash, I can forward dash and still attack my opponent. I can land, I can float back air dash. There are so many options that I can do here, it's not even funny. And obviously, that's excluding my character specific ones. So, with that in mind, when we evaluate neutral going forward, we're going to talk about it in terms of balance. Balance is going to be a word that you're going to hear a lot, and I'm going to find some martial arts examples that can help you visualize this in a more concrete and meaningful way. Are we all on the same page so far? There we go. There we go. Very nice. So, the next principle we're going to talk about is called, kind of. What are you confused about, Stealthy? I kind of missed a bit. Could you reiterate? Balance is essentially when neither opponent is at a disadvantage. You want to try to maintain your balance. In martial arts, this looks like you doing a move, but only so much that you get the desired effect you need. You don't want to end up encumbered by anything, meaning you don't want to overcommit if you're a swordsman, for example, or if you're a martial artist. You don't want to overcommit to an attack because overcommitting to the attack can throw off your literal balance. But it can also force you to basically take too much time to recover and counterattack, which your opponent, who's more balanced than you are, if they evade it, can probably retaliate. The way we move, we want to try to preserve the balance as much as possible by moving in ways that put us at as little disadvantage as possible while maximizing our ability to attack. We will cover that in a bit later. Is there any part of that you're not quite grasping? Make sure that we're all on the same page. Yes, exactly. You got it. Nice. I understand the concept. Very nice. All right. The next concept is one that you guys need to learn a little bit more. And the reason why is because you guys may not fully understand how to attack and how to beat these opponents. Press 1 in the chat, for example, if you're really afraid of Gogeta's EX Lariat. Oh, that's tough. Oh, I think I have to dash. I think the correct answer is 1, but if I'm being honest, I'm generally not. Good. No, you shouldn't be. I agree. I'm not afraid of it either. Nor am I afraid of Vegeta's 5M. I'm not afraid of Gogeta Blue's 2M. I'm not afraid of any of these buttons. Does anyone want to take a guess why? Yeah, you... 1.5, meaning I'm not when I feel balanced, but I know I'm vulnerable when I'm lacking balance. Yeah, understandable. They're a big commitment? Not necessarily. Like, this doesn't really have that much recovery, actually. It has less recovery than his 5H, less recovery than his 2H. Like, this is actually most characters whiffing a 5H, to be honest. It's basically him whiffing his 2M, which is not that heavy a commitment. And it is a commitment. You are 100% right. But no, the reason why is because I understand its distance. I understand its tip range. I understand its spacing. That is something we're going to talk about in a little bit. But the concept that we need to talk about is how we can get this to work. So right here, it says here that the startup is 14 frames point blank. That is humanly unreactable. At tip range, it's even faster somehow. We have about 18 frames here. We have about 18 frames at tip range. Or 13. No in between. This is a very scary lariat. Can come out of nowhere. Very, very difficult to react to. At tip range, 19 even. But at this range, it whiffs. So, in order to make this lariat scary from this position, I have to do dash. I have to micro dash. Now, this isn't that big of a deal, because most of the time people dash block, or they do dash, ID back, dash, lariat. There are ways you can hide this. But that's the thing. You, as the blue Gogeta, need to pay attention to something specific. It is one of the biggest mistakes that I notice, even in my more advanced students, and even in some top players, that they put overemphasis on the actual move itself. This is too strong. And there are many situations where this is incredibly strong. Do not misunderstand me. And if you do get hit by it, we all have. I have too. It's no big deal. But a good way to avoid a lot of them, and a good way to control your opponent a little bit, is by noticing when they're a threat. So if your opponent's moving like this, you know, they're not going to be able to lariat here unless you step forward. So if they do this, notice how, even though it's 13 frames, I had to dash first. Even just micro dash, which is very hard to do unless I buffer it. So if I could do, which is hard with this character, by the way, because of his air dash. Fuck. Yeah, it's very hard with the air dash, actually. I'm almost convinced it's not possible, because it just registers as a forward dash to buffer. I could probably, yeah. But that's a lot. Yeah. Yeah, that's tough. Point is, a Gogeta has to... See, I tried to do it. I tried to buffer it there. But I'm so rusty. Oh no. There we go. Got it. So they have to buffer it, which means that you only really have to worry about the lariat when I'm here in this range. If you know how to keep track of when I'm in this range, you essentially will learn how to deal with this lariat. This is what fencers will call a preparatory action. In other words, this requires a setup in order to be able to achieve properly, which actually slows down the move. Essentially, as in fencing, in Dragon Ball, this incredibly fast move does not reach all the way full screen. And because of this, you must set it up with prep. You need to be able to move into the range to make that move effective. Now, just like in fencing, a lot of things are very difficult to react to. It is a very small target, and it's very thin. Your eye line has to keep track of so many things. It is difficult to react to these things. This is the same for punches. This is the same for kicks, especially when you're fighting very, very, very high level fighters. I don't recommend doing that if you don't have any training, obviously. But what I'm saying is, these concepts in martial arts exist, and because the human can't be expected to react to every single thing because we don't know what's coming, and our eyes can lie to us, we can create blind spots. If I have a blind spot, I'm not going to be able to see the uppercut that's coming for me. If they feint and I pay attention to something else, I'm very vulnerable. A good way to keep yourself safe is to pay attention to the prep. If they step forward, maintain your distance. So, for example, if you see a Gogeta do this, you can either ID back, or if you're the blue Gogeta, you can lariat yourself because they just stepped into your range. Now, they will probably leave by the time you do it, but you gain an advantage because they're moving back. You can cover yourself on an assist. And now you are much closer to your opponent in a manageable range, probably with tempo if they just had to deal with your assist. So right here, this is a great example of prep. A lot of moves and a lot of players in this game require preparatory action, and you can usually determine the quality of that action based on what it gives you. For example, even though I did use dash as a way to set it up, I can also use short hop. I can also IAD. I can also air dash as Gogeta. There are a lot of ways I can set this up. I can even float back, air dash. I'm sorry, I can even, if I'm full screen, there are a lot of ways that I can get in. See? And a good opponent like Yasha and Wawa, when dealing with the same teams that drive you up the wall in ranked, one of the things that they will often do is they will attack their opponent's prep because they know that their opponent is only a threat at certain ranges. There is nothing that Gogeta here can do that can possibly hit the opponent. Now, that's not always true. For example, we have Yamcha on the team, and Yamcha can hit you from full screen, kind of. Yeah, there you go. Can also catch you jumping, so he's actually quite annoying. And his 5S pulls him back. He can also do multiple things. He can do this, or he can do or that. He has multiple ways to attack you, but all of them require prep, except that. So, at long range, Yamcha's actually more threatening than Gogeta, which is kind of crazy when you word it like that. Man, you really don't want to get hit by that. Jesus Christ. So, this is kind of important because Yamcha has a very unique thing that he can do. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply to Gogeta because of his special property on his lariat, that he's projectile invul, but something that Yamcha can do is this. Notice how it pulls him back away from his opponent. Same thing with, oops, Adult Gohan. It pulls him back where even if Gogeta did the lariat, it would probably whiff and leave me with tempo. Because this has far less recovery than Gogeta. And not only that, but I can also do that. These are little examples of different things that we can do in order to create situations that we can take advantage of. Whenever we prep, we break the balance. However, we don't break the balance as much as we would if we actually commit to the attack. This is why the act of stepping into your opponent's range and then IDing back is very, very powerful, and you'll see this a lot at high level neutral. The reason why you'll see this at high level neutral is because here we have what's called positional flexibility, something that you guys, if you have watched any of my old masterclasses on neutral, would understand. This is a flexible position. I can ID back, I can ID forward, I can charge forward, I can, if I have a character that can lariat, I can lariat. Like, I have a lot of flexibility here because I keep stepping in, and you don't know if I'm going to approach forward or I'm going to attack. Like, it can vary. But what's really important here is that you want to basically don't always target your opponent for where they're at, and don't always think about attacking their landing. Once you take that concept even further, you can begin attacking them in prep, which means if I see that Gogeta dash and have tempo, I can make him dash right into my 2M. Now, does that mean I'll hit him? Probably not. However, will he be forced to block? Yes, and I just won neutral. Now, Gogeta can do something like this if he knows I'm going to do that. But now we're entering the true give and take of real neutral. And we understand these principles on a deeper level now. The Ki Blast is the most textbook counterattack in fencing ever. Yes. So, very, 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 very useful. Do we have any questions on prep? Do you guys have any questions? Anything you would like to know? Okay, I'm overlooked. I understand the idea so far. I'm just wondering how to know when to do that, you know? A really great example is whenever your opponent steps into your range. If you can tell that your opponent's prepping something, you can make the decision whether or not you want to break the balance, or if you have tempo, you can go ahead and take advantage. It depends on the situation, but we'll see these principles in action in the voice chat later. I think it's something I don't really use. I just kind of float around, cross a pin with my assist. That's the only thing I really think of as my prep. Any movement would be considered prep because you would not be able to reach them if you didn't. So what that means is, Stealthy, you need to vary your prep a little bit because it's quite easy to kill. A prep decision is made in neutral to cover your opponent's decisions. So prep is a decision made in neutral. No. Prep is what you use to set something up. So for example, with Adult Gohan, this doesn't actually prep very much, because I don't really have anything that reaches. However, if I were to do something like this would be prep for Gohan. It looks different for every character, and it depends on what I can attack. For example, I could do JH, very big button. The way he can attack a situation is very different. Now, what makes Adult Gohan unique is that while Gogeta is very powerful and can dash to set it up, Gohan has counterattacks to the prep. He can actually counter the prep. Now, he can actually use this to harass his opponent and annoy them and bait them into a decision because he's constantly stepping into their range. But the fact that this pulls him back so quickly means that if my opponent attacks me, I can actually counterattack very easily now. Gohan is a counterattack character. He is somebody that in MMA would be a counter striker. If he was a swordsman in Kenjutsu, he would be a master of EI or Batodo. So Janemba Orban knockdown is prep, and is prep limited to neutral? Prep is limited to neutral in this particular case. Janemba Orban knockdown is Oki. Does prep include something not entirely offensive like Gogeta Success or Summon Base QB? Not exactly. Prep basically means that you are now in a place where you are able to create your strongest threat. So I'm actually glad that you asked that question, because this next concept is going to be the most important one. It's in the title and is going to be the hardest one to explain. So bear with me. This will tie the other concepts together. This is a concept that exists in Japanese martial arts. I believe it exists in all martial arts, but the Japanese really have an eloquent way of describing it. It's called Maai. M-A-A-I. Maai. And it literally translates to interval. Now, Maai specifically refers to a lot of things. There's many different types. There is Toma. There is Toma, which is long range attacks. There is Chuma, short range attacks. I'm not going to butcher it, but there's another one that means middle range attacks. But most importantly, there's also Kokoro no Maai, which means the interval of the mind. This is a very all-encompassing principle, but in my opinion, it is foundational to all martial arts. It is the first thing everyone should learn when learning how to do anything, martial arts, Dragon Ball fighters, fighting games, whatever. It is also the single hardest thing in the entire game to master. It is so important. Ken, are we defining prep as any action made prior to committing to an attack? Just to make sure we're on the same page. Yes, that's as far as it goes for DBFZ. Basically anything that sets you up. IDs. Anything that sets up your attacks, or rather your ability to attack. You don't always have to follow through on the attack, but an aggressive action is very much prep. So, yeah. Like, I don't count prep as you floating back to avoid an attack. I do count prep whenever you need to set up your attack. And I think the amount of time that that takes depends on, or rather, what should help you decide when to attack or when to prep should be tempo and balance. And the last concept, Maai. So, what does Maai refer to? Maai refers to the distance and time it takes to cross that distance between your opponent. So right here, Gogeta is in range of my pokes. Now this is a very scary range to be in, because I'm also in range of Gogeta's pokes. Gogeta has much longer reach. He doesn't quite have a better 2M because RS slides forward, but he does have a much nastier 5M. His jab is bigger. And our 5H doesn't even cover the same distance that his does. You might be thinking, wow, Gohan is very disadvantaged in this range. Yes, he is. However, Gohan is evasive. Gogeta isn't. So what that means is, because we know Gohan doesn't quite have the same reach, his Maai is going to be very different than Gogeta's Maai. He is not going to have as much freedom to attack. Does this mean Gohan is going to lose neutral? And does this mean Gohan sucks in neutral? No. It just means that you do not have the same level of priority that Gogeta has. You don't have the same level of dominance at this range. However, you do have a tool that Gogeta doesn't, that is very difficult for Gogeta to deal with. So now, Gogeta basically has to guess whether or not you're going to peel off, IID back, so he can't really lariat because the IID back JH will catch him, or charge in, or back fist, or stall your momentum. There's a lot that you can do here that he really has to be careful of. So, the interaction is a little bit more even than you think. I'm going to pull up the Wikipedia page for Maai, because I'm going to go ahead and translate the definition for you guys. So, Maai is a Japanese martial arts term referring to the space between two opponents in combat. This is known formally as the engagement distance. In other words, the distance you need to be at in order to reasonably engage. Here's the thing. If you're Gogeta here, Notice how I don't really have a threat at this range. One of the biggest things that I notice, even in my strongest players, even in the strongest players in this competition, is that you move unnecessarily. So remember how we talked about balance and we want to preserve that balance? Well, if you're moving around like a madman, you're actually destroying that balance. However, if we're right here in this hypothetical situation, around this range, this is so weirdly inconsistent. Around this distance, Gogeta doesn't have to move. Gohan has to make the decision whether or not to step in here. And Gogeta also has a lot of ways to stop you. This is Maai. You don't actually have to move as Gogeta in this position until you notice the adult Gohan getting closer. Now, is that practical? Of course not, because you're not going to react to even a dash up like 5L. Like, this is very hard to react to, for example, if you're not already moving. But the point that I'm trying to illustrate here is that what is the distance? If you understand your opponent's Maai, you understand their interval, which doesn't just mean the distance between you two, it also means the amount of time it takes for those individual attacks to hit you. What is the safest range that you can stand at in order to avoid your opponent? Gogeta can theoretically, if he wants to, stand right here. Should he do this? No, because all I have to do is boom, which is very hard to react to. All I have to do dash 5H, which is also very hard to react to. Of course, he can lariat, right? But, you know, I can also DP if I want to be a crackhead. Don't worry about the specifics of this engagement. What this means in particular is that these are non-threats to him. I can't actively threaten him unless I prep first. Now it's all starting to come together. The reason why we have to pay attention to the prep is because if your opponent's not moving, how can we get them to prep? If I step into his range, Gogeta no longer has to prep to lariat, which means I am now in active danger of getting a lariat to my face. I am doing the work for him because the prep is so that way he's in proper position, proper distance to be able to hit me. But if I move forward recklessly, he can just lariat me for free. And he doesn't have to worry about it. Like a character specific bubble. Exactly. And I'm glad that you used that example because we're going to come back to that. But this is foundational to martial arts. So an example of interval and Maai would be the difference between a taller and shorter fencers. Yes, they would have different Maai. And then taller fencers can cover ground more quickly and with less commitment. That is an example of Maai, yes. The way I would compensate this in a real match would be if I'm shorter, and I was going to do, like, you know, if it was an actual combat, if I were shorter, I would try to have something with a little bit more reach. So, like, I wouldn't be using a rapier or a foil. I would probably be using a spear, or I would be using a longsword. There are ways to deal with that, and obviously in real life it's a little bit different. But with Gohan, you know, we require a little bit more prep because we can't quite reach. However, we do have a very big advantage: this giant wall of a hitbox, which means, like, look how far this thing reaches for, like, no reason. I can hit his toes. Character squares. That's a way you could think of it, yeah. But the thing is that squares are a bit different. Maai here has a lot of different applications. Now, here's another thing that Gohan can do where he does have more of an advantage. Challenging Gogeta here is very risky. It's almost suicidal because he is one of the best characters in the game at this range. Not the best. That would go to Blue Goku. However, he is exceptional at this range. So if a Gogeta puts me here, if I understand Maai, I would want to put as much distance as possible where I can reliably escape the lariat naturally and minimize the threats that he can mount on me. So if I'm right here, he can hit me with 5M, 2M, he can hit me with 5H, he can lelele, he can 214L, he can 236L, he can 236M, he can 236H. Basically, he could 5S me. Anything this character does will hit me at this range. I do not want to be here. Even here, I'm not safe. I do not feel safe as adult Gohan because I understand Blue Gogeta's Maai. I understand his ranges. I don't want to be here. But what about right here? So right here, Gogeta doesn't have anything to threaten me with without prep. The only thing he can do is lariat. This is what we call respectful distance. Would Blue Goku and adult Gohan have similar might? No. Blue Goku has a key list. So right here, Gohan is a lot stronger than Gogeta. How? Because now I can attack him with the same retreating movement that I would normally do. I can harass him. Not only that, but I can actually charge into his distance and pull back to my original spacing. See? While continuing to harass him. If I'm high enough, I can even... And if I know he's going to want to super dash me or do something silly... I can do that. And I can call an assist. Assists also affect Maai, by the way. But that's going to be something that we cover later on. Yes. Yeah, because right here, you now have to stand at the tip range of my assists. This is where Saber gets lost. The amount of distance that an opponent can cover is based on their assists, and this is why I chose these teams respectively. For example, by bringing Gogeta, even though the position's perfectly balanced because we both have Yamcha, we do have one crucial difference in these teams. Both have Yamcha. However, he also has Kefla. And I have adult Gohan. We have a very big difference in the amount of range that we can cover. And because of the types of assists that we have, the Maai between our characters is going to look very different. It's now much safer for me to actually step into my critical range with tempo. My Maai is going to be quicker, so to speak, than my opponent. Because remember, Maai also refers to timing. It doesn't just refer to... Because here, Gogeta has big Maai. This is a massive button, but it's significantly slower than 5M. Significantly slower than 2M, kind of. Way slower than 236H. This is a long time. Assists break your brain. They shouldn't, because there's a very clear difference in the ranges that these can control. If you only have a strike assist, you need to move a lot more often than your opponent. If you have a projectile assist, as long as that projectile assist is up, you can afford to move in much larger, grander motions. For example, if I do this, I'm probably gonna die. Because there's too much control here. If he retreats, calls his Yamcha. If he retreats, calls this. If he retreats, lands, calls Kefla, he now has tempo. I can't really get away with big sweeping motions like that, while he can call Kefla, lock me down, and then control the air and the ground at the same time. His Maai is very different than mine. Does that mean my team is inherently weaker? A little bit. I'm sacrificing my neutral dominance here, a little bit, in favor of stronger pressure, because I have adult Gohan on the team, which is much scarier as a character than Kefla on block. So it just means that between these two teams, I would have to play them differently, even though the difference is literally one character. That is all it takes to completely change the Maai of a team. Now, there are types of Maai. I'm going to continue reading the Wikipedia page here. It says, the concept of Maai incorporates not just distance between opponents, but also the time it takes to cross that distance and the angle and rhythm of the attack. That's important. The angle and rhythm of an attack. Because here's the thing, right? If we're right here, my lariat is the scariest it ever is. You can't get away from this. If I'm right here, you can't even backdash. If you backdash, I'm actually going to catch your backdash with the lariat. So why would I lariat here? Because here's another mistake. You could be right in front of your opponent with an assist, and most of you guys will do this to pin. When it's unnecessary. Why is it unnecessary? Because any other button will reach. They all have different timings. 5M is much faster, but more importantly, 5M also yields a lot more options. It has a different rhythm than 236H. So a lot of Gogeta players will do this. They see that you block and they see that you blocked and they don't have an assist. They just gave up their turn. Even if I don't have an assist, if you block my 5M, now I have pressure. I have actual stagger pressure. And it can become very, very scary because now I can begin generating my assists back. I can begin mounting a counterattack. I can just hit you with my, my mix-ups. My mix-up options. Hey. Now, very, very important. All factor into the exact position from which one opponent can strike the other. An example, a faster opponent's Maai is farther away than a slower opponent, because the opponent can cross that distance a lot quicker, even if they have the exact same reach. It is ideal for an opponent to maintain Maai while preventing others from doing so, meaning that they can strike the opponent before they can strike, rather than both attacking simultaneously or being struck without being able to strike back. This is what leads to decisions like surrendering neutral. Understanding these principles isn't just good for your offensive neutral, it's also good for recognizing the position accurately for what it is. For example, how many times have you guys thought that you could do something, press a button, and then you hear those fateful words, counter? Press 1 in the chat if you've been counter hit in neutral in the middle of an attack because you didn't realize that your opponent can hit you and was not in stun. I imagine that this is probably a very universal, very, very, very universal concept, right? Like everyone has been in this position before. What happened was you did not read your opponent's Maai. The correct answer in most of those positions is to recognize that you do not have the Maai. If your opponent can attack and you are unable to attack first, you need to defend. Block, put those hands up. If you swing when you are not allowed to swing in a real match, this is what's going to lead your head smacking off a fucking canvas. You need to learn when you can attack and when you cannot attack, and you also need to learn when the jig is up. You guys need to learn when neutral's over, and understanding Maai will not only help you take more turns and help you figure out exactly how best to capitalize against your opponent, but it will also help you understand a little bit more of when to surrender, which will help you last and live longer. So that's very, 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 very important. In Kendo, Maai has a more specific interpretations. In physical terms, it pertains the distance between two opponents. When Maai is interpreted as the actual distance between opponents, there are 3 types. Toma, which is long distance, Isuko Itonomai, which means 1 foot, 1 sword distance, or also called Chuma, middle distance, and then Shikama, which is short distance. Itoma is distance equaling 1 step to make 1 strike. Basically, this in Dragon Ball. One step, one strike. It usually measures between 2 meters between the opponents, for which either one needs to advance only one step in order to strike the other. In other words, this is if we wanted to strike with 5M, whoever, this is called footsies, by the way. Shikama is a distance narrower than Itama, which means short close range, and Toma is greater, longer, or farther. So in this regard, if we take these examples into account, then Gogeta is a Chima god. However, he sucks at Shikama. I'm sorry, he sucks at Toma. Meanwhile, Yamcha can actually counter him by making him play at the ranges that he can't deal with. There we go. There you go. Oh, that's something to do. Yam pressure, yep. Yam pressure is dumb. Now, Gogeta outclasses Yamcha in might. However, Yamcha, being more defensively oriented, as well as Adult Gohan, excel more at the Toma, which is long distance. Now, there are some long distance masters and masters of all ranges. For example, Kefla. Kefla is a great example of a character that is equally threatening at long range, as well as just as threatening up close, because she has big buttons, but she also has some of the fastest ki blasts in the game, and she also has an unreactable lariat that almost reaches full screen, which she can follow up off of her ki blast and is even harder to reflect because it is a low. Her Maai is very, very good, and this can also help us interpret characters in a little bit more sensible terms. Are you guys following me so far? I hope that this makes sense. Like, as a foundational concept, I hope that this helps you guys understand the game a little bit better. Question. Yes, please. Would you call it a Mai Tai? No. And that's also slightly racist. Also kind of messing around for my team, learning my might. Toma. T-O-M-A. Toma is distance, them having a relationship is another thing. Oh. All right, are you guys ready to see if we can watch some real life examples and see if we can actually get an idea of what this probably means? I'm not going to explain it on stream right now, Saber. Let's see. All right. You guys should theoretically be able to see everything. Let me make sure we can. All right, cool. All right. So we're going to see a bunch of disciplines today. We're going to see a lot of different interpretations of different skills, but I'm going to go ahead and pull out something interesting. So this is actually the source for the Wikipedia document, which is apparently the Kendo Reader Noma Hiroshi, which is basically, I'm not exactly sure what this document is. I think it's a translation written by somebody who basically distilled Kendo, like Kendo principles in the early 1900s. But basically, we could see their treatise on this, and let's see if we can find anything useful. Everyone's favorite part of a stream, reading. Maai, in the broadest interpretations in physical term, pertains to the distance or interval that is maintained between two swordsmen. In terms of time, it pertains to the momentary lapse. Oh, right. There's also different types of Maai. There's also the Maai of time, and the mind. Shit gets crazy. In terms of time, it pertains to the momentary lapse of awareness that are manifested in the opponent's mind. These may be compared to the swinging to and fro of a clock's pendulum. Extended further, it also embraces the concept of kyojitsu. These momentary lapses of mind and kyoritsu we will call kokoro no mae, which means mental interval. The import of kokoro no mae is that although the physical distance between combatants may be mutually advantageous, the mental interval possessed by the individuals, we're going to highlight that, all right? We're going to highlight this. Kokoro no mae, mental interval. Although the physical distance between combatants may be mutually advantageous, the mental interval possessed by individuals will determine who will have the decisive advantage. In other words, which one of you is less of a bitch? I'll go ahead and post the link here. Oh, I can't post links. Why are you like this? Can I actually not do that? Why? Wait, why? There we go. Even so, I'm not just posting for you. Much of the mysteries of Maya are encompassed by the workings of mental interval. As may be deduced from the old teaching, for him it is as far, for myself it is close. That is such a really cool line. So, what this is telling us is that even in ancient swordsmanship, and ancient styles. This is something that we can determine. We usually talk about the mechanics of the game, meaning we're talking about what actually occurs between two characters mechanically. Who has the advantage? We can measure that in frames. But in reality, who wins, even if they're exactly the same, is going to come down to the person with essentially the stronger intention. There is also a Maai of interval, which is so interesting because I feel like the biggest issue with the mid level is that you don't really treat the game like it is between two human beings. We like to think of the game in clear, concrete, hard terms where, oh no, that wouldn't work against this particular situation. And we try to like find the most optimal thing. And that does have its place. But at the end of the day, the ranges are not the same in the opponent's mind. And that is where you can start finding the advantage. If you can learn how to recognize that, it reminds me of an old saying by Miyamoto Musashi. If you can make your opponent flinch, you've already won. I know it's kind of a baller. It's kind of a hard line, right? It's kind of baller. Time to start practicing prep action and making less necessary movement and using my assists. Yes, I'm glad. Thank you. I hope you guys do that. And I'm glad that you're inspired to do that because I guarantee you, you're going to have a much easier time learning the game when you approach it from that perspective. When you approach it from that perspective and you grapple with these concepts and you really internalize them, even watching high level play, like even if you have no intention of competing at the highest level, even understanding these principles can actually go a long way in enriching your viewing experience, especially now that we're in a world tour. So it's going to be a lot of fun. All right. However, Maai is generally interpreted to mean the actual distance between the combatants. Amongst the specialized terms in Kendo, today are some that have remained unchanged for 300 or even 500 years. Not all of these terms are particularly suitable for what they are supposed to describe, and we cannot help but think that they are a little bit vague and perhaps deserve new and more suitable interpretations. Be that as it may, these terms oops, by the way. Be that as it may, these terms are used to express extremely subtle, technical, and spiritual concepts, and therefore make redefining the more modern and appropriate terms a very difficult task. All said and done, at least for some time to come, we have to rely on the traditional terms. In Kendo, there is a teaching, Isuko Ito no Mae, which is the distance equaling one step to make one strike. This refers to the distance of about 2 meters between the opponents from which neither will advance one step, and which either need to advance one step in order to strike the other. So basically, round start distance for most of the for the game. Basically, if we're between the same characters, this is going to change a lot in a fighting game, especially because the amount of distance that we can cover is generally pretty set, but still worth considering and see if we can translate it to something else. This refers to the distance, okay? Normally, most techniques are initiated at this distance. A distance narrower than this is known as shikama, close distance, and a greater distance is known as toma, long distance. At toma, there is a small margin of time to allow for the reaction to be made against an opponent's attack. At Toma, there is a small margin of time to allow for a reaction to be made against an opponent's attack. Kind of like how, in order for the Gogeta to do his unreactable lariat, he needs to dash. And if we understand that range, his Maai for that 236H, we can actually react against it and properly counterattack. We can also use this against characters like Lab Coat if we know that they're going to 236H, because then you can move into the attack and 2H it. But at Isuko Ito no Mae, there exists almost no margin at all, so that at this distance, one's attention has to remain constantly alert and unbroken. So this is actually good mental advice for neutral, right? If you guys are in the mid-range, okay, if you guys are in zone 2, if we put it in Dragon Ball terms, that zone 2 would be our Isuko Ito no Mae, basically. If that's where we're gonna be, right, then we have to remain constantly alert and vigilant, which means this might be why if you're suffering from, well, not suffering, but if you have ADHD, this is probably a very hard task for you, and neutral probably is not the most fun thing to learn. Furthermore, at Toma, if the opponent is at fleet of foot and the footwork is good, in other words, if Toma happens to be his strong point, then the situation becomes the same as Isuko Ito no Mae against one's guard cannot be relaxed in the slightest. What this means is, against Kefla or characters that can actually contest that range, you cannot let your guard down even in zone 3. That's very interesting. Usually, however, there is a comparative safety in taking up a position at Toma as when raising from Sonkyo to face the opponent. It is not possible to leap into the attack from Toma unless one's footwork is up to the mark. Therefore, always endeavor to train from this distance, as there are great advantages to be had from doing so. At Toma, an opponent's inept footwork and the technique can be struck with ease. Oh, so you can attack in prep. Interesting. Can be struck with ease, while at the same time, a position of safety can be maintained. So basically, Kefla's Ki Blasts are incredibly effective at stopping an opponent with a lariat. Not necessarily Gogeta, but if you see a Gogeta dashing in, your lariat might hit him first. Interesting. Of the various Maai, the Shikima is the least demanding physically and is the easiest to find oneself drifting into. To counter this, especially at the beginning of one's Shugyo, always try to train from Toma. So basically what they're advocating is try to practice your neutral from the furthest possible position that your characters can control, is how I'm interpreting this. You want to practice from where your opponents are at the greatest disadvantage, because if you learn how to move in and out of that distance and how to control that distance, your superior movement will actually make your Gogetas or your whatever characters you're playing, your Bardoks, way more effective in that guard. Concerning Maai in more concrete terms, if the opponent Isok Itonoma need to only step one take in order to strike men, then it follows that if one takes one step to the rear, the opponent's sword will fall short. In other words, at Isoko Itonoma, if you dash 5M, you can actually make it whiff by backdashing and counterattacking with your own 5M. Interesting. Again, if by retreating one cannot avoid the opponent's sword, one might cause it to miss by stepping either to the left or right, or else it could avoid the blow by leaping into the opponent himself. These actions belong to tactics of Maai, which, by the way, we will be discussing the concept of Maai going forward in depth. So definitely look forward to that. These actions belong to the tactics of Maai. Consequently, we would say that Maai is the way by which advantageous distance is maintained through movement to the rear, front, left, or right. So we only have 2 dimensions. Technically, we actually have 3. I'm sorry, 4. We have rear, front, high, low. That's how we can attack the opponent. So if we can control those distances, we can learn the Maai. Maai is basically maintaining the advantageous position or advantageous distance in order to constantly pressure the opponent, even if we're not attacking. Even as one is trying to maintain a suitable distance from the opponent, he too is active for the same reasons, so one must continue to maneuver in accordance with his activities and the changing situation. Know the opponent's Maai and know one's own, and always take an advantageous position, although this is the most difficult to do. First of all, it is vital to be aware of one's own Maai. Press 1 in the chat if you frequently thought you could hit your opponent and you just fall short, but your opponent didn't even move. You would have hit them if you were just like an inch forward, but you whiff and then you got 5M'd. Press 1 if that hyper-specific situation has been you. You must know your Maai. By the way, as you guys may have begun to gather, this is why it's dangerous to constantly switch teams and constantly switch your assists. It's not that it's bad for you or that you can't play multiple characters or that there isn't an advantage to learning multiple characters, but if you're constantly switching teams, that means you don't understand your own Maai intrinsically. It's not enough to know that distance. You have to be able to know that distance and feel it. It's a feeling. You need to know how far you can reach, and you need to know when to feel safe. If you know that with your body almost, you can begin to instinctively keep the distance away from you. For example, those of you that have trained with me, like Fuzzy, this is why you feel like you can hit me, but you can't, and why I'm never afraid of you in neutral. It's because I understand my own Maai, essentially. I understand the distance that I need to maintain in order to feel safe. That's why you struggle. That's my secret. Surprise. There you go. There's my big secret. To know that from a certain distance one can strike successfully and that from any other one cannot, this must be grasped through regular training. You heard it here, guys. Practice. Also, do you need to focus on your own or focus more on your own or your opponent's mind? You should always focus on your opponent's. You should know your own like the back of your hand. The reason why you need to know your own like the back of your hand is so that way you don't think about it. You know where you have to be. And you have to watch your opponent carefully and see how far you can reach in order to get in there. Maneuvering that is very, very, very important. The beginner will come to understand his Maai through exercises like kirikaeshi or uchikomi, which through being taught that such and such a distance is enough for fro striking. Oh dear, enough fro striking in and striking stepping out. This is actually kind of poorly translated. I'm pretty sure this might not be very well written. If one could watch Miyamoto Musashi in Shiai, one would notice that although one's opponent appears to strike and thrust at Musashi's head or chest, in fact it fails to touch him at all. One day, when one of his more able pupils who were amazed by the ability asked him how he managed it, Musashi explained it like this. That is well noticed. It is known as Tachisaki no Mikiri, and it is the most important thing to do in Shiai and Shinken Shobu. So basically what that means, I don't understand why they didn't translate this, but Shiai and Shinken Shobu is basically like wooden and real swordsman, like a real combat situation, like training and actual fighting. When you are a beginner, you must train hard at the 5 positions. After that, you may be able to train in Tachisaki no Mikiri. Without unnecessary use of the 5 positions, you must learn to avoid being touched by the point of the opponent's sword. Just how does Tachisaki no Mikiri work? Well, you must gauge a distance of 1 inch between. By the way, this is a real dude. Okay, these are his actual words. You must gauge the distance of just 1 inch between the point of your opponent's sword and yourself. Imagine literally practicing neutral 1 inch between your Gogeta's 5M, or like Gogeta Red's 5M and you. And that's the distance you play neutral at. If there is at least a distance of 1 inch, even if he strikes or thrusts, the point of his sword will not touch you. If you are unable to gauge the distance of his thrusts, the point of his sword will. If you are unable to gauge the distance of 1 inch, then his sword may strike you. So you must either receive or parry. However, at first, it may difficult to be gauge. It may be difficult to gauge 1 inch. So first of all, training by gauging a distance of 5 or 6 inches, then 3 and 4, and then gradually decreasing the interval until you gauge 1 inch. So this is actually, I didn't know there was a technique for it, but yeah, this is what I would call micro positioning. Where those of you who have trained with me, this is how I'm able to get so close to you and then whiff punish you, even though you swore you should have hit me. I'd also say that you know your opponent's Maai better than they know yours. Even if they do know mine, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, don't forget that governing all of this, just at the beginning, is kokoro no Maai, meaning the confidence. The confidence it takes for you to let an opponent whiff an inch from your face is very, very high. Not a lot of people would be confident. Like, think about this. Think about this insanity for a moment, guys. A sword will literally cut you open. It can kill you. It is a lethal weapon. And imagine being so confident in your knowledge and their distance that you can watch the sword whiff right in front of your face and not flinch. That right there is also part of Kokoro no Maai. He is so fucking confident that he knows his opponent's ranges that he doesn't feel the need to hang back farther than he needs to. That is probably the biggest thing that I think fucks over most of my students. So Tachisaki no Mikiri is judging the gap between oneself and the point of the opponent's sword. So this is actually interesting. Tachisaki no Mikiri. So we're just going to call it Mikiri for short. Mikiri is basically where you are versus the tip range of your opponent's farthest attack. In other words, their assist. You must gauge a distance of just 1 inch between the opponent. Okay. Well, there is no doubt that 1 inch is quite minute, but it is the way of Kenjutsu that what is important is usually minute and subtle. If you train with this in mind, you will come to grasp the way of Mikiri. Oh, cool. So I'm not the only one who shortens it to Mikiri. Nice. From now on, I will instruct you in this. So Mikiri, for those of you that don't know, is the goal. This is the final step of your neutral. Mikiri. This is where I want any of you listening to this, if you want to compete at the highest level, if you want to go to majors, if you want to try to make top 8, this is your goal right here. This is your target. If you can get this, you will finally understand Yasha. After this explanation, he chose from his pupils those skilled in footwork and had him attack in various techniques while he called out to them the distance by how much of their points were falling short. 1, 2 inches, 3 inches. That is baller. Yo, Musashi, chill. After this explanation, he chose from his pupils those skilled in footwork and had them attack him with various techniques while he called out to them the distance by how much they whiffed. That is actually godlike. That is wild. What do you guys think of that? What do you guys like? First of all, I mean, what do you guys think of the concepts? Obviously, is this helping you understand neutral a little bit better? And more importantly, what do you think of Miyamoto Musashi being this baller? On occasion, he also struck back at his pupils, purposely missing them and calling out the distance by which he missed. Ooh, wow, that's a lot of control. Ooh, that's goals for me. Damn, that is fucking crazy. So that's interesting. Let's see some videos. By the way, guys, I'm going to watch videos from Martial Arts Journey and ANA Global Channel. Is Japan Cool? Make sure to subscribe and follow these if you're interested in videos like the ones I'm about to show you. So this is the journey of an Aikido practitioner who basically worked with, I believe, a welterweight, or I'm not sure, an actual MMA UFC fighter from Sweden, and they both basically discussed martial arts terms, where he taught him a little bit of Aikido, and basically their goal was to try to figure out how they can make it practical for a real fight, and do they use these concepts in real fights. So I'm going to go ahead and go through two of them. So right here, striking to unbalance.
That is known as atemi, while translated by functional in MMA. The next principle we looked at is known as atemi, while translated by many simply as a strike. In Aikido, it's commonly described as a means to upset your opponent's balance or mind in order to apply your technique. After hearing about it, that's what Oliver had to say.
If I'm just looking at your head, I'm gonna kick you, you're gonna block it, right? Often I do like this. Boom.
Oh.
See? I look at your leg to draw your attention. That's my smoke screen. That's my atemi, perhaps. For the takedowns, I use my strikes. Right. For you to throw back your strikes, that's my entry. As we said before, if I just try to dive for your legs, I'm probably not going to get him if you're trained at takedown defense.
This explanation of atemi also seemed to make a lot of sense, making yet another Aikido principle valid for MMA. The next principle was kuzushi.
Interesting. So how can we use atemi to basically take advantage of how can we basically take advantage of this in Dragon Ball? Well, does this mean you should never poke? And here's a bigger question. Does this mean it's always bad to whiff? The answer to that question is no, it's not. Sometimes there are times where I will win neutral by purposely whiffing. So what I'll do is I will 236H knowing that you're probably going to IAD back. And the moment you IAD back, I call my assist to catch your retreat. And I basically use the lariat to get me in. So that way I can shorten the distance between you and my assist. So for example, if I call Yamcha, Yamcha takes a long time to reach his tip range, but he's a lot faster if you're closer to him. So if I lariat call Yamcha, you probably have no choice but to block, and I have one neutral. That would be Atami, for example.
For the takedowns, right?
About is known as atemi, while translated by many simply as a strike. In Aikido, it's commonly described as a means to upset your opponent's balance or mind in order to apply your technique. After hearing about it, that's what Oliver had to say.
If I'm just looking at your head, I'm gonna kick you, you're gonna block it, right? Often I do like this. Boom.
Oh.
See? I look at your leg to draw your attention. That's my smoke screen. That's my atemi, perhaps. For the takedowns, I use my strikes. Right. For you to throw back your strikes, that's my entry. As we said before, if I just try to dive for your legs, I'm probably not going to get him if you're trained at takedown defense.
This explanation of atemi...
There you go. So, we do get Maai engagement distance. Let's see what happens. Let's see what they have to say about Maai.
Push you off balance.
The next principle...
I have the Tegatana principle, so I have a strong frame to push you off balance.
The next principle we took a look at is known as Maai, often translated as engagement distance. It is the ability of the Aikido practitioner to know when they are at a safe distance or when the distance is right to perform a technique.
This is the first thing I teach a beginner, but it's also the hardest thing to master. Imagine you have like a circle where you can reach me.
Where's? There it is.
Without having sparred that much with you, I would say somewhere around here, I still feel safe. If I take a step in here, now I've crossed this line, the danger zone. I would stay out here and I would perhaps go into feint like this to see your reactions. And then from this, I can draw attacks
I love that. So from that distance, he can draw attacks. So the reason why you might see a high level player dashing forward and IEDing back is the equivalent of what Oliver
like
is doing here.
To see your reaction.
To see the reaction. Step in, step out. Step in, step out. And draw an attack. Because remember, an opponent's not going to attack unless they think it's going to hit you, unless they're really, really bad. A skilled opponent will only throw out a poke if they're sure that it's going to hit, or if the situation after they do it is still advantageous for them. And that's very important to keep in mind. So for those of you wondering, how do you break an opponent with better might? Well, just because, for example, a Gogeta can reach you at a max distance doesn't necessarily mean they will.
And then from this, I can draw attacks.
If you draw their attack, like with Gohan 2S, you will probably hit them, which even though Gogeta has control over that situation, if you're in a Gogeta's range, that 2S is going to be enough to control him. Now, he might 236H, but if he 236Hs and you decide to 5M, he gets hit because it doesn't have a traveling hitbox.
Start putting more pressure. If you move forward, I need to adjust. So you keep pushing forward, I need to break the space like this. If you go backward, I need to use this momentum to take this space. So when you
take your space, guys, give your opponent, but when you see your opponent retreating, they're giving you the space. One of the biggest issues that I see, one of the biggest weaknesses that I see, and again, my most talented players, and I mean the pink squares, I mean all of my pink squares have this issue. You guys don't take your space. You guys allow your opponent to come into you, or sometimes, sure. But if your opponent retreats, some of you guys don't follow them. You don't maintain that distance. You don't maintain that pressure.
You start to move away from me, I'm going to be there all the time. I put my pressure. I don't need to use my hands. I can put pressure just with my intention. If you
put pressure just with my intention. When those of you are like, wow, how did you know that I was, like, for those of you in ring match evaluations, you're like, wow, how did he know that I was going to strike? I felt your intention because I saw you moving forward. You intended to attack me. And it was, you prepped. I was paying attention to your prep. Now, here's the thing. If you're in this position, even without your hands, you are putting pressure on your opponent. This is the thing that controls your opponent, even when you are not actively neutral. For example, and if you see a Gogeta, they have a lot of potential, a lot of ways to get over you if you're adult Gohan, but that 2S is a very powerful point of control. That Gogeta has to weigh their options.
move around.
And if you're moving forward, you might be signaling your intentions. And you have to be very careful. The Gogeta may actually retreat because the Gogeta doesn't want to get hit by you, even though their buttons are bigger. This is how you play neutral with characters like 21. This is how you play neutral against characters like Android 21. This is how you play neutral against characters like Vegito, Gogeta Blue, especially Gogeta Blue, because if he whiffs, he dies. So with Gogeta Blue, your goal should always be to draw that attack.
I need to adjust. So you keep pushing forward, I need to break the space like this. If you go backward, I need to use this momentum to take this space. So when you start to move away from...
Maybe too much. You do it definitely too much. Because you back away to the point where you're not even a threat anymore.
You're absolutely there.
You need to maintain... So you're not maintaining that pressure at all.
Put my pressure. I don't need to...
If he backs off, he gives all of that space to him. That's your problem, Stealthy.
Use my hands. I can put pressure just with my intention. If you move around a bit, I'm going to put pressure on you without doing anything.
Right. Yeah, you're absolutely there.
So it's all about the focus here. And I feel like at any point of time now, I can choose to engage. I will drop my Maai and feel the difference now.
Yeah, I can feel like...
Yeah.
I can strike.
I'm moving around you, but I'm not controlling you.
To my surprise, all of the 8 Aikido principles...
I'm not controlling you. I'm moving around you, but I'm not controlling you. That would be the very minute difference between my orange squares and yellow squares and my pink squares. You don't control your opponent. Interesting. This next one, and the last video that we'll watch today before we sign off, is Isao Machi, who is a EI master and probably one of the best EI practitioners in the world. What are the characteristics of EI?
まず、型稽古の中で一番大事なのは、止まらないということなんですね。それは僕だけの考えかもしれませんが、今世間一般によく見られる居合っていうのは、抜きつけたらそこで一旦止まる、振りかぶったらそこでまた一旦止まるっていうふうに見せどころで少々止めるっていうのが当たり前になってるんですが、それを当たり前のように身につけてしまうと、今度は術として使えないものになってしまいます。常に体の関節を緩み続けながら、一方向に、いつかない、常に体が緩んで動き続ける、そうすることによって、腕をつかまれようが足をつかまれようが相手の力に反発することなく、対応できるというふうなものですね。まず、右手で刀を抜くと、斬撃力がなくなります。おまけにその動きも相手に読まれてしまいます。ですから、僕自身が一番大事にしている相対性を変えないということなんですけども、自分勝手に動いてしまうと相対性が崩れた瞬間、
The moment you move, the balance ends and your opponent gains an advantage.
相手の方が有利になってしまいます。ところが、
But if you continue moving your body without changing your balance, your opponent fails if he falls behind. This is, once again, that faithful movement pattern of dashing forward, super jump forward, ID back that you see Kaiden, Wawa, and Yasha do a lot. This is why they are moving without changing their balance.
変えないままで体を使い続けていくと、それに、その反応に遅れた敵の方が勝手に自滅していく、倒れていくっていうような現象が起きるわけです。それを学ぶのが型です。間というのは、大きく分けて3種類に分かれます。距離的な間、それから上下左右とか、空間的な間、それから時間的な間ですね。このどれも、一つもかけてしまうと、技は成立しませんし、非常に、居合に限らずどの武術でも一番大事なものだと思います。
Interesting. So in these completely unrelated videos and in Dragon Ball, they would still be changing their balance though, just minimizing it, right? Yes. I mean, the thing is, right? If you dash forward, you're -4, but there's nothing in the game system that's fast enough to actually hit you. And depending on what your opponent is doing, it may actually be safer than whatever they're doing. So for example, if I dash forward, but my opponent IED back, I actually recover first. So that balance shifts. That balance is relative. And I love that word balance because I feel like what we were doing before when we described tempo is that tempo put too much emphasis on what you were doing and not enough emphasis on the balance between you and your opponent's movements. You need to tailor your actions to what your opponent is actively doing at that time. That's the balance. If you do the move that has that least commitment between the two of you, you have a balance in your favor. Your opponent has fallen behind. By the way, falling behind implies tempo. You gain tempo when you recover faster than your opponent from whatever it is that you guys are doing. They're still landing, for example, so you can catch them landing with a lariat or something. You could, theoretically, yeah. But the thing is, that won't always work. Because I like that you're thinking about catching their landing, but here's the thing, right? If you dash forward and they IED back, if you dash forward lariat, that IED's still gonna whiff. I'm sorry, that lariat's still gonna whiff right in front of them because they are maintaining the balance there. Remember, balance is intrinsically tied to Ma or Maai. Because it's tied to Ma, even if the lariat can reach them because you dashed, the IAD maintains that distance, so you still take an equal amount of time to reach them. And even though they are more minus than you are if you just dash, because you lariat, you now basically shift the balance in favor of your opponent. So it's not always as easy as just sniping their landing, because Ma also consists not just of the physical distance, but it also consists of the amount of time, the interval it takes for your attack to reach them. You would have to account for it with a preparatory action or another selection to account for the retreat. Exactly. You would need to find another way in. However, as we learned with Oliver, if your opponent is moving back, the way somebody IDing back would be, you can take the space given. There's no need for you to retreat if you dash forward. You take the space and you can keep putting pressure on them. That's very, very important. You can take the space that they're actively giving you. It brings us full circle into this example. However, you don't need to lariat because you can also super jump. You can dash forward. You can call an assist. There are ways that you can essentially take and keep the space that they're giving you, which would make them retreating, putting them potentially at a disadvantage. Your opponent cannot retreat forever.
Turned out to be practical in MMA, but I only discovered this after I explored them with an experienced fighter while having fighting.
So that's actually pretty interesting, guys. Did you guys learn anything? Do you guys feel like Mutual is beginning to make a little bit more sense? Because if so, I hope you guys will join me in the next 2 weeks when we revisit this topic and we review it and we continue to go on a further deep dive on Maai, because Maai is the thing that we could talk about for ages. It is the core of all martial arts and everything that we're going to do. We're going to talk about different elements of Maai. We're going to talk about building strategies using Maai, how to train Maai, how to build particular drills and constantly practice this. And maybe we'll even do some sparring matches with tier 2 subs. There will be a post stream voice call where I will answer your questions and we'll discuss it in depth, and we could watch more videos and see how this translates in Dragon Ball. So if you guys are interested in that, make sure to subscribe so you get access to the Discord, so that way you can join post stream VCs like this, as well as get access to me and Star. If you guys like what you saw here and you want to go ahead and give a tip, make sure to follow, subscribe, or you can donate. Donating is the easiest way to support the stream, as all of the proceeds except PayPal's cut goes to us, and any dollar amount helps us, guys. But thank you so much for joining me on this. I hope you learned a lot, and I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your evening. Yes, there will be a VOD. Bye, everyone.